There were villages so quiet that time itself seemed reluctant to pass. This one lay in the low folds of the English countryside, where crooked lanes bent between hedges older than memory, and where the church bell told not only the hour, but every rumor that was carried on the wind. The place was small, so small that every stranger's shadow drew suspicion, and every closed door invited questions. And yet, for all its stillness, it was alive in ways that unsettled the careless traveler. Life here followed rhythms: the clatter of hooves at dawn as farmers took their wagons to market, the murmurs at the bakery when the day's bread came steaming from the oven, the rustle of skirts at the well when women gathered with buckets, exchanging stories that never ended where they began. There was laughter, there was hardship, but above all, there was gossip. No event was too trivial, no secret too private. It all spilled out, reshaped, embroidered, until truth itself was unrecognizable. In this town, reputation was as fragile as a candle in the wind. It was into this precarious world that Lord Ashbourne arrived. His carriage rolled through the village on a wet autumn afternoon, the wheels biting into the mud with a sound that made heads turn. Curtains stirred, children were pulled back from the roadside, conversations broke off mid-sentence. The manor on the hill had long stood silent, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Now, with smoke already curling from its chimneys, it stirred to life once more, and with it the restless imagination of the townsfolk. The manor had a reputation, one not spoken of loudly but whispered when firelight burned low. Some swore they had seen strange figures at its windows years after the last owner had died. Others recalled unexplained lights in the woods surrounding it, pale glimmers that danced too deliberately to be lanterns. To many, the house itself seemed cursed. Its ivy-choked walls and iron gates held stories no one dared fully tell. For years it had waited, empty, patient, as if brooding over something only it remembered. So when Lord Ashbourne stepped down from his carriage, tall, composed, and unsmiling, the entire village seemed to inhale at once. He was a man of striking presence, dressed in fine dark wool that seemed too heavy for the mild weather, his gloves immaculate, his boots without a trace of mud despite the journey. He glanced neither left nor right, as though the villagers who peered from their windows were beneath his notice. With a curt gesture, he dismissed his driver and disappeared into the manor, the gates clanging shut behind him. That first evening, speculation spread like spilled ink. Some said he was fleeing debts in London, others claimed he had been driven away by scandal involving a woman of ill repute. A few swore they had recognized him from years past, wandering the continent after some disgrace. But no one knew for certain, and the absence of truth only deepened the hunger for answers. The tavern that night buzzed louder than it had in years. Men leaned in close over their mugs of ale, and women lowered their voices, certain someone was listening. By the second day, the baker's wife swore she had seen him walking the grounds at dawn, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as though searching for something or someone. By the third, the butcher claimed his boy had glimpsed a pale figure moving in the upper windows, though no servants had been officially hired. By the fourth, children dared each other to run up the lane toward the manor's gates, only to turn back shrieking when a curtain seemed to twitch. Each tale grew taller, each whisper sharper. Still, what was most unsettling was not what was seen, but what was not. Lord Ashbourne did not introduce himself. He sent no notice of arrival to the vicar. He made no purchases in the shops, nor offered a word of greeting to those who lingered near his gates. He moved through the village like a shadow too heavy to pass unnoticed, yet too distant to be approached. Silence clung to him, and where silence fell, imagination thrived. On the fifth night, a storm swept through the valley. Rain battered rooftops, wind rattled shutters, and the church spire groaned under the strain. Yet amid the tempest, villagers swore they saw the manor ablaze with light, every window lit, as if some grand feast were taking place. But when dawn broke, the house was once more shrouded in gloom, its windows black, its grounds slick with rain. Some dismissed it as fancy, a trick of storm and shadow. Others were less certain. The arrival of Lord Ashbourne did more than revive the manor. It unsettled the delicate balance of the village. Long-buried rivalry sharpened, ambition stirred, and secrets pressed closer to the surface. Clara Whitfield, for one, could not ignore him. Sharp-eyed and outspoken, she had no patience for airs of superiority, and Ashbourne's aloofness pricked her pride. She told herself he was nothing more than another arrogant nobleman, and yet she could not help but watch the windows of the manor each time she passed, wondering what manner of man chose to live so completely apart. And so the stage was set, not with a loud announcement or a grand event, but with a silence that weighed heavier than words. The town, once predictable, now thrummed with expectation. Every day carried a new rumor, every night a fresh unease. Lord Ashbourne had entered quietly, but his presence was a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward, touching lives that had not yet realized they would be changed. For in villages like this, where gossip moved faster than the wind, no secret could remain hidden for long. And Lord Ashbourne, whether he willed it or not, had brought with him secrets enough to keep the town whispering deep into the winter nights. The village prided itself on its gatherings. They were not lavish affairs, no glittering chandeliers, no orchestras flown in from the city, but in their modest way they were events of consequence. A barn cleared of hay, a few lanterns hung from beams, tables laden with pies and stews. Such things were enough to set the whole town buzzing for weeks in advance. It was here, amid laughter, music, and the smell of spiced cider, that most reputations were made or broken. And it was here, inevitably, that Lord Ashbourne would be measured. The night of the harvest gathering arrived brisk and bright, the air scented with wood smoke. Families filed in dressed in their best, the men in press coats, the women in gowns that had been mended and altered across generations, but worn with pride nonetheless. Clara Whitfield attended with her sisters, their mother fussing endlessly over ribbons and hymns. Clara herself cared little for ribbons. She was not the sort to flutter eyelashes at strangers, nor the sort to hold her tongue when words begged to be spoken. Her eyes were sharp, her mind sharper still, and she entered the gathering not with expectation, but with curiosity. She did not have long to wait. The manor had sent its representative. The moment Lord Ashbourne stepped through the barn's wide doors, a hush fell. Conversation stilled. The fiddler's bow hesitated mid-string. He was dressed in deep black, as though attending a funeral rather than a celebration, and his height seemed to swallow the lantern light. He did not smile, did not bow, did not even acknowledge the many curious gazes fixed upon him. Instead, he strolled to the far side of the room with the precision of a man crossing hostile territory, his eyes scanning faces as though they were items on a ledger. Murmurs rose. Some admired his composure, others bristled at his indifference. A village gathering was not London society, where aloofness passed for refinement. Here, warmth was currency, and Lord Ashbourne had offered none. Clara watched him with narrowing eyes. Pride, she thought. He had come among them only to remind them of their smallness. She felt the prick of it like a thorn under the skin. Introductions began, awkward and halting. The vicar, sweating slightly under his collar, offered a polite welcome, to which Ashbourne replied with a bow so shallow it bordered on insult. Mrs. Langley, who had organized the food, presented him with a plate of pies. He declined with a curt shake of the head. When old Mr. Phelps, half-deaf but endlessly cheerful, attempted to engage him in conversation, Ashburn's answers were clipped, delivered with the air of a man forced to account for stolen minutes. The villager's initial awe curdled into resentment. Eyes rolled, lips pursed. A single glance was enough to carry the unspoken consensus. Lord Ashburn was a man who thought himself above them. Clara's dislike, already simmering, began to boil. It was not only his manner, but his silence, his refusal to even attempt civility. She thought of the gossip that swirled about him, of debts and scandals, of the restless light said to burn in his windows. Whether true or not, he carried himself as though no judgment could touch him. She resolved then and there that judgment most certainly would. The moment came sooner than expected. It was during the dance. Couples lined up, the fiddlers struck a lively tune, and laughter filled the barn once more. Clara, unwilling to sit idle, joined the line with her sister Mary. Halfway through the set, the music swelled and the dancers spun in pairs. Lord Ashburn, who had stood watching with an expression bordering on disdain, was pressed forward by Mr. Whitfield himself, Clara's father, eager to make peace. "Go on, my lord," he urged with nervous cheer. "A dance among neighbors never hurt anyone." Ashburn gave the faintest sigh, as though humoring a child, and stepped into place. Fate, or mischief, placed him opposite Clara. Their eyes met. Hers sparkled with challenge, his with cool indifference. The dance began. Hands touched briefly, then released. Ashburn moved with precision, his steps measured, faultless, yet utterly joyless. Clara, light-footed and quick, matched him with deliberate grace, her chin tilted high. "You do not seem to enjoy yourself, my lord," she said as they crossed. "I find little enjoyment in noise," he replied, his voice low, clipped. "And yet you attend willingly?" "Willingly is not the word." Clara's smile sharpened. "Then perhaps unwillingly. That would explain much." A flicker crossed his eyes, irritation quickly masked. "It is not unwillingness, Miss Whitfield. It is restraint, a quality some might find admirable. Others might find it cold, only to those who mistake frivolity for warmth." The exchange, though delivered in tone soft enough to avoid scandal, did not escape notice. Nearby dancers caught fragments, whispers spread, and by the time the set ended, the barn was alive with speculation. Clara's words, quick and cutting, had drawn blood. Ashburn's replies, though restrained, carried an edge that did not go unnoticed. When the dance ended, he bowed stiffly, she curtsied with mocking grace, and they parted with eyes that promised no reconciliation. From that moment, the gathering shifted. Where before Ashburn had been regarded with suspicion, he was now viewed with a mixture of amusement and disdain. Clara had said aloud what many thought in silence, and for that she was quietly celebrated. Yet, in equal measure, some pitied her. To cross a man of wealth and titles so openly was dangerous. Pride was not easily forgotten, nor prejudice easily forgiven. The night wound on. Music played, cider flowed, laughter returned, but beneath it ran a new current. Ashburn withdrew to the shadows, speaking to no one, his gaze flicking toward Clara with a look that was neither admiration nor anger, but something sharper, unreadable. She, for her part, avoided his eyes, though her thoughts returned to him more than she cared to admit. She had not intended to make herself his adversary, but the role had chosen her, and she wore it without regret. When at last the gathering ended and lanterns were snuffed one by one, the villagers spilled out into the cool night air, buzzing with stories to tell. Some would speak of the fine pies, others of the lively dances, but most would speak of the clash, the spark struck between Clara Whitfield and Lord Ashburn. It was a small moment, a few barbed words exchanged across a dance floor, but in villages such as this, small moments carried weight far beyond their measure. By dawn, the story would be polished, exaggerated, embroidered with detail until it bore little resemblance to truth, yet at its heart the truth remained. Lord Ashburn had made his first impression, and Clara Whitfield, whether she liked it or not, had become the one to define it. Rumors are never born whole. They arrive in fragments, half-remembered words, glimpses caught at the wrong moment, small truths bent into larger lies. In the village, they traveled faster than illness, carried from the baker's shop to the tavern, from the tavern to the churchyard, until they returned to their starting place so changed that no one could tell where they began. Lord Ashburn, aloof and silent, was a ready vessel for such tales, and the villagers, eager to fill silence with meaning, gave him a past more scandalous than any truth could have managed. It began with money. Old Mrs. Cartwright, who prided herself on knowing more than she should, insisted that Ashburn had fled London with creditors on his heels. He gambled, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, though no one else was near. Cards, horses, wagers in houses where no respectable man would set foot. Lost a fortune, he did. That's why he's here, hiding. Her companions nodded eagerly, though not one of them had ever seen London, let alone the clubs and salons where fortunes vanished in a night. Soon after, another story took root. Mr. Howard, a farmer whose fields bordered the manor, claimed his boy had overheard shouting one evening, Ashburn's voice raised in fury, followed by a crash of breaking glass. "Cruel to his servants," he declared, "drives them near to madness. That's why none stay more than a week." In truth, no one could confirm a single servant had left, for no one in the village had been inside the manor since Ashburn's arrival. But evidence mattered little when fear and suspicion were enough. The darkest whispers, however, came with the greatest relish. A scandal buried deep, involving a woman. Some said she had been a mistress cast aside when she became inconvenient. Others insisted she had died, an accident hushed up, her body never found. A few swore she haunted the manor still, a pale figure glimpsed in the windows at night, waiting for justice that would never come. No one could agree on the details, but the uncertainty only gave the tale strength. Clara Whitfield heard it all. At the well, where women lingered with their buckets longer than necessary, she listened. At the market, where bargains were struck between nods and winks, she listened. At her own table, where her mother repeated what she had gleaned second-hand, Clara listened most of all. And she believed. She believed because belief was easy. Ashbourne had shown her nothing to suggest warmth, nothing to challenge the picture painted by rumor. His disdain at the gathering, his curt words, his refusal to mix with the villagers, it all fit neatly into the portrait of a man whose pride concealed corruption. Clara, sharp of tongue and quick to judge, told herself she saw through him more clearly than others. She was not fooled by dark eyes and fine coats. She knew his kind. Men who wore arrogance like armor, who considered honesty beneath them, who thought their wealth excused cruelty. And yet, though she despised him, she could not ignore him. Each time she passed the manor, she found her gaze drawn upward, searching the windows for a flicker of movement. Each time she overheard a new story, her pulse quickened with anger, not only at him, but at herself for caring so much. Her dislike of him became a fire carefully tended, each rumor another log thrown upon it. One afternoon she encountered Mrs. Langley at the milliner's. The woman leaned close, her breath warm with cider. "Do you know what I've heard, Miss Whitfield?" she whispered. "They say he keeps his fortune locked in the manor, great chests of gold and silver, guarded day and night. Why else would he shun the banks? Mark me, it's ill-gotten." Clara's lips tightened. Ill-gotten indeed, and he dares to walk among us as though his presence were a gift. Mrs. Langley's eyes gleamed. "You see as I do, pride in every step. But pride cannot hide rot forever." Clara nodded, the words sinking deep. She told herself it was not malice that guided her, but justice. Better to see clearly, to warn others, than to be charmed by false appearances. Yet in the quiet of her thoughts, she wondered why his image lingered so vividly. The set of his shoulders, the measured cadence of his speech, the way his eyes had flickered during their brief exchange at the dance. Disdain, yes, but something else too. Something she refused to name. Her sisters noticed her mood. Mary teased gently, suggesting Clara thought of Lord Ashbourne more than she admitted. Elizabeth, the youngest, asked in innocence why Clara frowned whenever his name was mentioned. Clara dismissed them both with sharp words, unwilling to confess that disdain had begun to feel like obsession. As autumn deepened, the rumors grew darker still. Some spoke of debts so vast the crown itself might be involved. Others claimed he had dueled in France, leaving a man dead. Each telling fed Clara's certainty that she had been right from the beginning. When she saw him on the lane one morning, her carriage passing hers, she refused to incline her head. He looked straight ahead, offering no acknowledgement, but the set of his jaw struck her like a challenge. She felt her heart beat faster, though with anger she told herself, and nothing else. The village, once merely curious, now seemed to thrum with quiet hostility. Doors closed when Ashbourne passed. Children were pulled close. Men at the tavern raised their mugs in mocking toasts, loud enough to be heard should he ride by. Yet through it all, he gave no sign of notice. His face remained composed, his manner distant. Silence was his answer, and silence was more damning than words. For Clara, silence became proof that he hid something, proof that he disdained them all, proof that his heart was as cold as his expression. She thought of the woman in the rumors, the mistress discarded, perhaps dead, and shuddered at the idea of any soul bound to him by affection. Better resentment, she told herself, than pity. Better hatred than weakness. And so her prejudice hardened, set like stone. She carried it with her into every conversation, every glance at the manor, every sleepless night when shadows flickered against her wall. Ashbourne had become more than a man to her. He was a symbol of arrogance unpunished, corruption unexposed, and she would not forgive him, not now, not ever. But resentment is a dangerous thing. It feeds on itself, grows fat in silence, and blinds even the sharpest eyes. Clara did not yet see how little she truly knew. She did not see that every rumor was a thread in a tapestry woven not of truth, but of fear, envy, and imagination. She believed she saw the whole picture, when in truth, she had barely glimpsed its edge. And in that blindness, the seeds of her greatest error were sown. Family life at the Whitfield house had always been noisy, but lately the noise carried a different edge. Beneath the laughter, beneath the chatter of five sisters filling every room, there ran a current of unease. It began with Lydia, and once it began, it seemed unstoppable. Lydia was restless, eager, full of a confidence that came not from wisdom, but from the certainty of youth. She was 16, convinced the world existed to delight her, and when the regiment arrived in town, she seized upon it like a child upon sweets. Soldiers in polished boots, crimson coats, and gleaming buttons became the object of her fascination, but it was Captain Harwood who captured her wholly. He was handsome, charming, and quick with compliments. His voice dipped low when speaking to her. His grin seemed meant for her alone, and Lydia responded with an abandon that alarmed her family. She leaned too close, laughed too loudly, and let his gaze linger on her with no protest. To the villagers, it was entertainment. To Clara, it was danger. Clara watched her sister's behavior with rising dread. She knew enough of men like Harwood. Men who spoke prettily and departed swiftly, leaving nothing but ruin behind. The rumors of his debts, his late nights at cards, his broken promises in other towns, Clara heard them all and believed them instantly. Yet Lydia seemed deaf to caution. One afternoon, Clara confronted her. "You cannot trust him," she said, voice tight. Lydia only laughed. "You do not understand. He's different. He listens to me." "He listens because it amuses him," Clara snapped. "When his amusement fades, what then?" Lydia's eyes flashed. "Better to be admired and laughed with than to sit frowning at shadows as you do. You see ill in everyone." The words stung because they were true. Clara had grown sharp, restless, consumed with suspicion since Lord Ashbourne's arrival. Her thoughts circled him endlessly, his pride, his silence, the endless rumors surrounding his past. Even now, trying to protect Lydia, she found her mind straying toward him, imagining how easily a man like Ashbourne could discard a woman once she ceased to please him. And so her warnings to Lydia carried too much heat, too much bitterness. Instead of guiding her sister, she pushed her further away. Mrs. Whitfield noticed the danger too, though she cloaked it in denial. A marriage into the regiment seemed advantageous, an officer respectable. She soothed herself with half-believed reassurances. A man in uniform must be honorable, yet her eyes betrayed her doubt whenever Lydia disappeared too long. Mr. Whitfield muttered vague complaints about propriety, but his voice was mild, his authority fragile. The household revolved around the daughters and their mother's ambitions, and Lydia paid little heed to either. Clara felt increasingly powerless. She wanted to shield her sister, to seize her by the hand and drag her away from Harwood. But each attempt to intervene left her more frustrated. Lydia called her jealous, dour, too serious, and perhaps she was. Nights found Clara sleepless, replaying every rumor, every glance. In Harwood's easy smile, she saw the shadow of Lord Ashbourne, cold and distant, hiding secrets. In Lydia's careless laughter, she saw the makings of ruin. One evening, Clara passed the green and saw them together. Harwood bent close, whispering. Lydia giggled, blushing. His hand brushed hers. Clara froze. For a moment, she imagined rushing forward, striking words from his mouth and dragging Lydia home. But pride held her back. She would not humiliate her sister in front of the village. She turned away, though the sight burned in her mind long after. At home she paced, furious with herself. Why did she hesitate? Why could she not act with decisiveness she so admired in others? Each day she delayed, Lydia strayed further. Each day Clara's thoughts grew more tangled, part dread for her sister, part resentment toward Ashbourne, who seemed to embody every corruption she despised. The whispers grew sharper. In the tavern, men chuckled about the officer's conquest. At the well, women lowered their voices, pitying Mrs. Whitfield. Neighbors watched Lydia's bright figure pass with knowing eyes. Gossip, once faint, now thundered in Clara's ears. At last, Mrs. Whitfield confronted Lydia. Her voice rose, shrill with fear disguised as anger, but Lydia only laughed again. "I am admired. That is more than enough." Clara wanted to scream that admiration was not love, that admiration could curdle into ruin, but her words stuck. She had grown too bitter, too distracted. Her mind circled Ashbourne, his rumored scandals, his disdain. She told herself protecting Lydia meant exposing men like him, men who destroyed without remorse. But the truth was simpler and crueler. She was failing her sister because her pride made her blind. That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the house's silence. Shadows stretched long across her room. She thought of Lydia's laughter, Harwood's smile, Ashbourne's eyes. Pride, prejudice, scandal, they all blurred together until she felt trapped in a storm without shelter. The days rolled on. Lydia drifted further into recklessness. Harwood lingered close, whispering promises. The village gossiped, and Clara, torn between anger and fear, could only watch as the balance of her family began to tremble. The invitation arrived on thick cream paper, its edges pressed with gilt. Mrs. Whitfield nearly swooned at the sight, for it was from the Harringtons, the wealthiest family in the neighboring county, famed for their grand balls. Few villagers ever attended such gatherings. Fewer still were welcomed. To be included was a triumph. Mrs. Woodfield fluttered about the house for days, instructing her daughters to mend gowns, polish slippers, and practice curtsies as though royalty might appear. Clara felt no such thrill. Balls meant noise, pretense, endless small talk spoken through forced smiles. Yet she could not refuse. To deny her mother's pride would be unkind, and to deny her sisters their joy would be worse. So she prepared, though without enthusiasm, fastening the ribbons of her gown with steady but unfeeling hands. The manor where the ball was held seemed a palace to Clara's eyes. Tall windows glowed with hundreds of candles, music spilled from within, violins singing over the hum of voices. Carriages lined the gravel drive, horses stomping in the crisp night air. Inside, chandeliers blazed, scattering light across polished floors. Men in fine coats and women in silks filled the room, their laughter echoing beneath the vaulted ceilings. Clara entered with her family, keeping close to her sisters. She had barely taken in the scene when her gaze caught on a figure across the hall, Lord Ashbourne. He was as severe as ever, clad in stark black, his expression unreadable. Though the room glittered with merriment, he stood apart, as though the gaiety did not touch him. A glass of wine rested untouched in his hand. His eyes scanned the crowd, not admiring, not curious, but weighing, measuring. Clara's chest tightened. She had hoped to avoid him. Their eyes met, briefly, before she turned away. She would not allow him to see her unease. The night unfolded as such nights always did. Dances, introductions, shallow conversations spoken through forced smiles. Lydia, radiant in her ribbons, laughed too freely with Captain Harwood, drawing knowing glances. Mary lingered at the edges, shy and bookish. Elizabeth, the youngest, clung to Clara's hand. Clara herself danced once, then refused further offers, content to observe from the shadows. It was during a pause between sets that she found herself nearer to Ashbourne than she wished. He stood with a group of gentlemen by the refreshment table, speaking in that low, restrained tone that forced others to lean close to hear. Clara had no intention of listening until her family's name caught her ear. "The Whitfields," one man murmured, lifting his glass. Ashbourne's reply was cool, cutting, spoken without hesitation. "Tolerable girls, perhaps, but hardly worth the trouble of notice. Their family," he gave the faintest shrug, lips curling, "lacks refinement. One does not associate too closely if one values reputation." The words struck like a blade. Clara froze, heat rushing to her cheeks. She had thought herself inured to his disdain, yet hearing her family dismissed so coldly, so publicly, seared her pride. Around her, laughter continued, oblivious. No one else seemed to notice, but she had heard, and she could not forget. Her first instinct was to storm forward, to confront him then and there, but some instinct stronger than anger restrained her. To create a scene would shame her family further. So she remained rooted, her nails digging into her palms, her breath sharp. She turned away, retreating into the crowd, but the words echoed endlessly, hardly worth the trouble of notice. The rest of the night blurred. Clara danced no more. She smiled when spoken to, but her smile was brittle. She laughed when required, but her laughter was hollow. All the while she felt Ashbourne's words gnawing at her like a wound left untreated. When at last the ball ended and the Whitfields climbed into their carriage, Mrs. Whitfield chattered about the chandeliers, the gowns, the elegance of it all. Lydia spoke of Harwood, her eyes alight. Mary whispered of the music and Elizabeth of the sweets. Only Clara was silent. Her silence stretched into the following day. When her sisters pressed her, she dismissed them with sharp replies. When her mother asked if she had enjoyed herself, she forced a smile that convinced no one. Inside, her anger burned hotter with each hour. She replayed the moments over and over, Ashbourne's indifferent posture, the curl of his lip, the casual cruelty with which he dismissed her family. Pride had always been his sin, but this was unforgivable. It was not merely insult, it was humiliation. He had reduced her sisters, her parents, herself to objects of derision. To him, they were less than nothing. And Clara, who valued honesty above all, who spoke truth even when it stung, could not endure such false judgment. That night, she sat awake long after the others slept. Moonlight spilled across her floor, silver and cold. She vowed silently and fiercely that she would never forgive him. Whatever else might come, whatever secrets or revelations might unfold, nothing could erase those words. In Clara's heart, the wound became a wall. And behind that wall, resentment hardened into resolve. Lord Ashbourne had declared himself her enemy, and she would answer in kind. Scandal does not fall like thunder. It creeps, it whispers, it poisons. For the Whitfields, it began with Lydia's absence. She had gone to visit a friend, or so she claimed, but days passed and no letter came. Her laughter no longer filled the house. Her chair at supper sat empty. Mrs. Whitfield insisted all was well, yet her trembling hands betrayed her fear. Clara knew the truth. Lydia had followed Captain Harwood. The village buzzed with rumors. Some said the officer had debts in every county. Others whispered of women he had abandoned. Each rumor added weight to Clara's dread. If Lydia had eloped without marriage, their family's name would rot in every drawing room, every market stall, every whispered conversation. No man of standing would ever align himself with the Whitfields. Clara's father seemed paralyzed, his mildness ill-suited to the storm now gathering. Mrs. Whitfield wept behind closed doors, and Clara, who had warned of danger, found no triumph in being right. She felt only helpless rage at Harwood, at Lydia, at herself. What Clara did not know was that another had already begun to act. Lord Ashbourne, whose arrogance she despised, heard the whispers as clearly as she, but unlike the Whitfields, he did not wring his hands. He sought Harwood directly. It was a cold evening when Ashbourne entered the officer's lodgings, unannounced, his presence filling the dim room like a shadow. Harwood looked up from his cards, startled. Wine stained the table, coins lay scattered, and two companions quickly excused themselves, leaving the captain alone with his visitor. Ashbourne closed the door with deliberate calm. "You will sit," he said. Harwood obeyed, though unease flickered across his face. "You have entangled yourself with Miss Lydia Whitfield. You have convinced her of promises you cannot keep, and you intend, I presume, to discard her as you have others." Harwood tried to laugh. "Surely it is none of your concern, my lord." Ashbourne's gaze hardened. "It is entirely my concern. The Whitfields may not command wealth, but they possess what you do not: honor. You will not destroy them to amuse yourself." The officer bristled.
but Ashbourne pressed on. From within his coat he produced a ledger, pages inked with Harwood's debts, gambling, taverns, creditors circling like vultures. Ashbourne placed it on the table, his gloved hand steady. "Your reputation is already ruined," he said. "One word from me and you will be driven from this county in disgrace. But I offer you a choice. You will marry Lydia Whitfield, and you will treat her with the dignity she deserves. In return, I will settle these accounts. Your slate cleared. Your honor salvaged." Harwood paled. He knew the trap. To refuse meant exposure and exile. To accept meant binding himself to the very girl he sought Ori to entertain. Yet the debts weighed heavier than his pride. He swallowed hard and nodded. "Good," Ashbourne said. "Then it is settled. The ceremony will be discreet, but proper. I will see to the arrangements." With that, he turned and left, leaving the officers staring at the ledger as though it were a noose. Days later, Lydia returned. She entered the Whitfield home on her fiancé's arm, her cheeks flushed with triumph rather than shame. Mrs. Whitfield wept again, but this time with relief. Mr. Whitfield mumbled blessings, barely believing disaster had been averted. The village, primed for scandal, found itself silenced by the sudden announcement of a marriage. What had seemed ruin transformed into rescue. But Clara, however, was not deceived. She knew her sister too well. Lydia's eyes shone not of love, but of the thrill of victory. She had secured a husband, and in her mind, that alone was triumph. Harwood played the part of suitor, bowing politely, speaking gently, yet his smile did not reach his eyes. She saw tension in his jaw, the stiffness of a man cornered. Still, society accepted appearances. The Whitfields were spared disgrace. Invitations resumed, neighbors congratulated, and Lydia basked in the attention, heedless of the price paid to protect her. It was not until weeks later that Clara learned the truth. A letter arrived, unsigned, but unmistakable in tone. In measured words, it revealed all. Ashbourne had confronted Harwood, cleared his debts, and forced the marriage to preserve her family's honor. Clara read it in silence, her hands trembling. Ashbourne, the man who had insulted her, who had dismissed her as unworthy, had acted in secret to shield them from ruin. He had borne the burden without seeking credit, without demanding gratitude. The revelation unsettled her deeply. She wished to despise him, as she always had, yet how could she? His pride remained, but now she saw something else beneath it, a stern sense of duty, a willingness to sacrifice quietly for others. That night, Clara stood at her window, the letter clutched in her hand. The village lay silent under the stars, the manor a dark silhouette on the hill. She thought of Ashbourne alone in those echoing halls, carrying secrets no one would ever know. For the first time, Clara wondered if she had judged him wrongly.
The scandal was smothered, the family saved, yet its shadow lingered. Lydia prattled of gowns and wedding plans, oblivious. Harwood bowed and smiled, bound now to a fate he had not chosen. And Ashbourne, silent guardian, withdrew once more into his solitude. But Clara could not forget. His intervention haunted her. It humbled her. It unsettled the certainty with which he had condemned him. For pride and prejudice, she realized, were not sins reserved for others. They lived in her as well. And so the tale turned, not with thunder, but with a quiet act unseen by most, an act that would change everything. The Whitfield home seemed lighter after Lydia's marriage, but for Clara, shadows lingered. Her mother busied herself with wedding preparations, her sisters whispered of dresses and guests, yet Clara's mind drifted elsewhere. The letter still lay hidden in her desk, its edges worn from repeated handling. She had read it a dozen times, perhaps more. Each reading tightened the knot within her chest. Ashburn, the very man she had sworn never to forgive, had been the one to protect them. And he had done so in silence, as though his name had no need to be attached to the deed. Why? Why would a man so proud, so scornful, act in such selfless secrecy? The contradiction gnawed at her. Days passed before she saw him again. The encounter came unexpectedly at the edge of the village green. Clara had gone to gather books lent by a neighbor, her basket heavy on her arm, when a carriage halted nearby. From it descended Ashburn, clad in his customary black, his expression as severe as ever. For a moment they merely stared at one another, the bustle of villagers moving around them. Clara's pulse quickened. She might have turned away, but something held her still. Perhaps it was the letter burning in her mind, or perhaps it was the weight of all that had gone unsaid. Ashburn inclined his head. "Miss Whitfield." "My lord?" she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then, gathering her resolve, Clara spoke. "I know what you did." His gaze flickered, the smallest shift, yet it carried the force of a storm. "And what is it you believe I did, Miss Whitfield?" "You confronted Captain Harwood. You forced him to marry my sister. You paid his debts. You spared my family from disgrace." Ashburn's expression remained impassive, yet she saw his jaw tighten. "If you are so certain, then there is little use in denial. Why? Why would a man so proud, so scornful, act in such selfless secrecy?" The contradiction gnawed at her. For the first time, Ashburn looked away. His eyes followed the villagers, the children chasing one another, the market women bargaining. His voice, when it came, was softer than she had ever heard, because honor demanded it, and because I could not bear to see you suffer. Clara's breath caught. The words hung between them, fragile, dangerous. She searched his face, seeking mockery, but found none. His composure had cracked just enough to reveal something raw beneath. "I have been proud," he continued, his voice low, almost a confession to himself. "Too proud to speak, too proud to bend. I let that pride blind me, but believe me, Miss Whitfield, when I say that my feelings toward you have long been more than I should allow." Clara's heart pounded, her thoughts scattering like leaves in wind. This was the man she had despised, the man she had sworn never to forgive. Yet here he stood, not arrogant, not cruel, but vulnerable. His admission unsettled everything she thought she knew. "You insulted my family," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes." His answer was immediate, unflinching. "And it shames me still. In my conceit, I thought myself above such company. I was wrong. You," he broke off, his gaze returning to hers, steady, unyielding. "You are the measure of my error, Miss Whitfield. You are the proof of my folly. And yet, despite every reason to silence it, my regard for you remains." Clara's heart tightened. Part of her longed to cling to her anger, to guard herself behind the wall she had built. Yet another part, softer and more dangerous, whispered of the letter, of his deeds, of the man revealed in shadows rather than in boasts. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "Say nothing," he replied, his tone firm once more, though the softness lingered beneath. "Say only that you will allow me the chance to prove that I am not the man I once seemed." The villagers around them bustled on, oblivious to the storm raging quietly in their midst. To them, it was nothing more than a polite conversation, but for Clara, it was a reckoning. She could not answer him then. Her heart was too tumultuous, her pride too raw.
Instead, she inclined her head, a gesture neither acceptance nor refusal. "Good day, my lord," she said, her voice faint. He bowed slightly, his eyes searching hers for something she could not yet give. Then he turned, mounted his carriage, and was gone, leaving Clara standing with her basket heavy on her arm and her thoughts heavier still. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling as shadows played across the walls. She remembered his voice, steady yet trembling at the edges. She remembered his words, "I could not bear to see you suffer." Her anger wavered, not gone but shaken. Pride battled gratitude, prejudice clashed with truth. She now saw that Ashburn was not merely the villain she had painted. He was flawed, yes, but within those flaws lay something truer, something she could not easily dismiss. The confession had not resolved her feelings, it had unsettled them. But in that unease, a new possibility took root. For perhaps hatred and love are not opposites after all. Perhaps they are neighbors divided only by the thinnest of walls. And in that moment, Clara realized hers was beginning to crumble. Truth rarely arrives with a trumpet. More often, it comes quietly, slipping through cracks in the stories we believe. For Clara, truth came in fragments. A whispered remark here, a letter there, until the web of lies she had trusted unraveled strand by strand. It began with Mrs. Ellery, the apothecary's wife, who spoke one afternoon of Lord Ashburn's servants. Clara had grown used to tales of cruelty, how he underpaid them, how his house was a prison. Yet Mrs. Ellery's account was different. She told of a boy once dismissed for theft, not ruined, but given work at a distant cousin's farm, his debt cleared by Ashburn himself. Strange for a tyrant, is it not? Mrs. Ellery had mused, eyes sharp. Clara laughed politely, unwilling to admit the thought unsettled her. But the seed was planted.